Good morning, Trump's family. Have a great Friday, everyone. Thank you for always watching and subscribing to the channel. Alright, without further ado, let's get into the news. We talked about the Democrats' October surprise. And we talked about how Nancy Pelosi, Liz Cheney ended January 6th. Michelle, along with the Biden DOJ and the Biden regime, is setting up a ploy to arrest President Trump in October before the midterm elections in order to energize their base for them to come out and vote for their clowns in Congress. I believe this is going to horribly backfire on the regime if they continue down this path. This is something that Liz Cheney had talked about recently in interviews over the weekend with Me Depressed and places like that, talking about how they had so-called evidence, and they were going to be turning it over to DOJ to investigate Trump even further to see if they could arrest him. This is where this is all going. And this announcement was just made yesterday. It says breaking: Joe Biden's DOJ opens investigation into President Trump. No surprise here. I kept telling you guys this was possibly coming down the road. The Biden Justice Department has opened an investigation to Trump's action to overturn the 2020 election results. The Biden regime is jailing its political opponents and now investigating a former U.S. president. Meanwhile, the Republican Party remained silent. According to the Washington Post, the DOJ prosecutors are probing conversations with Trump, his lawyers and other in his inner circle who sought to substitute Trump allies for certified electors from some states Joe Biden won. According to the Washington Post, emphasis Rs, the Justice Department is investigating President Trump's action as part of its criminal probe, the efforts to overturn the 2020 election results. According to 4 people familiar with the matter, prosecutors who are questioning witnesses before the grand jury include top aides to Vice President Mike Pence, have asked in recent days about conversations with Trump, his lawyers and others in his inner circle who sought substitute Trump allies for certified electorate from some of the states that Joe Biden won. According to 2 people familiar with the matter, both spoke on the condition of being anonymous to discuss the ongoing investigation. The prosecutors have asked hours of detailed questions about meetings Trump led in December 2020 and January 2021. His pressure campaign on Pence to overturn the election, and what instructions Trump gave his lawyers and advisors about fake electors and sending electors back to the states. 2 people said some of the questions focused directly on the extent of Trump's involvement in the fake elector effort led by his outside lawyers, including John S. Eastman and Rudy Giuliani. These people said there are 2 principal tracks of investigation that could ultimately lead to additional scrutiny of Trump. To people familiar with the situation said, also speaking on the condition to be anonymous, the discussion of ongoing investigation to first senators on the seditious conspiracy, and a conspiracy to obstruct a government proceeding. That type of charges already filed against individuals who stormed the Capitol on January 6, and 2 leaders of far-right group Stuart Rhodes and Henry Enrique Theriault, who did not breach the Capitol, but were allegedly involved in planning today's events. The second involves potential fraud associated with the false electoral scheme, or with pressure Trump and his allies allegedly put on the Justice Department and others to falsely claim that the election was rigged, and votes were fraudulently cast. So, there's the whole thing there if you want to go check it out. It'll be in the description. The Washington Post comes as U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland said he is open to prosecuting Trump in his role for January 6. Garland was asked by NBC Lester Holt if indicting a former president would tear the country apart. He says, "Look, we pursue justice without fear or favor." Merrick Garland told NBC. Really, Black Lives Matter? Antifa no. Okay. Just anyway, it's your political opponent. Gotcha. Interview that will air Tuesday night. So if Trump were to become a candidate for president again, that would not change your schedule, or how you move forward or don't move forward. Hold ass. I'll say again, we will hold accountable anyone who's criminally responsible for attempting to interfere with the legitimate law for transfer of power from one administration to the next. Garland said, "Guy's a weasel. No person is above the law in this country. There's nothing in the principles of prosecution which prevents us from investigating anyone who is criminally responsible for the attempt to undo a Democrat election." Merrick Garland said last week, when asked if Trump can be prosecuted, they're going to go all in for it. This is it. This is all they got. They have to do it. If they're going to do it, They have to do it. Before the November election, they have to do it. Because if not, they're going to be out of power. And they're not going to be able to bring it, they won't have any power to do it. So they have to do it. Now. This is why we've been watching this and we've been following it. And we've been leading up to this where we think that this could happen. And it's definitely not out of the realm of possibility. Is it a big miscalculation on the Democrats' parts? Absolutely. Absolutely. Huge miscalculation if they go down this road, but they don't care at this point. It's all or nothing to get rid of Trump. That is their main focus, has been the focus of the January 6th committee. That's been the focus of the impeachments. That's been the focus of the Democrat Party, that mediate and never Trump heirs for the last 7 years at this point now, so that is their sole focus. And now, that's not just one, that's 2 CNN videos in one day with the exact same topic, CNN bashing Democrats. Now the first one was, of course, the Biden administration and their ridiculous redefinition of the term recession, or the concept, the technical definition of a recession. But this one's more of the DNC, the DCCC big money Democrat campaigning strategy, which CNN political analyst or CNN anchor John Alvin described as cynical and hypocritical. So we now have CNN openly mocking Joe Biden and the Biden administration's messaging. And now we have them condemning and slamming DNC political strategy headed into the next couple of elections. This is definitely a topic that we have to cover. It's actually very interesting. So we'll play the little CNN clip, we'll try to look over all of the mud democracy January 6th, garbage that he says he doesn't realize how much of a hypocrite he is, pushing the narratives and talking points that he's pushing while condemning the Democrats for essentially doing the same thing. But we'll get into that later. We'll cover the Democrats' new election strategy headed forward. I think it's going to be a real disaster for them, a total political miscalculation, and then maybe if we have time after that, we'll get into some basic polling analysis, taking a look at the outlook of the midterm elections. Once again, we got some stuff to get into. So let's roll the tape. Alright, folks, take a look at this article right over here from The Blaze. CNN anchors shreds Democrats for cynical and hypocritical midterm strategy. Everyone listen to this. There's a lot of righteous talk, especially from Democrats, about how we need to build the biggest possible coalition to defend democracy. Couldn't agree more. And charter members of that Profile and Courage caucus are the 10 House Republicans who voted for Trump's impeachment after the insurrectionist attack on our Capitol. They've gotten a lot of praise for putting country over party, but talk is cheap. And the reality is that those brave folks, including Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney, have been taking a lot of fire from left and right this year. The most recent example is Congressman Peter Meijer, a young Army veteran rising star from Michigan, a man whose independent-minded, common-sense conservative principles perfectly fit the district once held by Gerald Ford. But yesterday, with 1 week until his primary, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee decided to drop more than $400,000 ad buy in his district to boost the name ID of his Trump-backed bar-right primary opponent, because they believe he'd be much easier to beat. It's incredibly cynical and hypocritical. But it's also part of a trend. Democrats trying to meddle in Republican primaries, not to aid honorable Republicans, but to try to kneecap them. It's a dangerous game to play because with the gravitational pull of midterms moving away from the president's party, there's a non-zero chance that some of the more extreme candidates could win, despite being objectively worse fits for their district. Democrats are targeting honorable outliers like Peter Meijer. Unfortunately, he's not alone. Take Adam Kinzinger and John Katko. They both voted to impeach Trump, both represent blue states, Illinois and New York. And then once a decade redistricting, Democrats essentially erased their districts. Now they could have gone after the districts of sedition caucus members like Mary Miller or at least Stefanik, but knew they saw more upside going after the few remaining centrist Republicans. Okay, now you guys see exactly what I was saying in the intro, the insurrection caucus, mud democracy, garbage, fear-mongering, as he condemns the Democrats for formulating a strategy around that exact topic. You know, a couple of months ago, when the Democrats drove Adam Kinzinger his district entirely, we weren't catching on to what the Democrats' strategy at the time was. At first glance, it was good job, Adam Kinzinger. You sided with Nancy Pelosi, and then you got absolutely royally screwed by the Democrats right after, but now it's all coming to light, their strategy is all coming to light. And it all boils down to one specific thing, funnily enough, the concept of Ultra MAGA. Bear with me for a second, but the Democrats are taking a very risky political gamble with their new strategy. They did all of these surveys and focus group research, and they came to the conclusion that Donald Trump and Donald Trump-associated Republicans are real scary, and that concept is going to be their key to victory. Fear-mongering about Trump Republicans in the concept of Ultra MAGA that they came up with, and they've devoted themselves so deeply to this political theory that Democrats are currently trying to eliminate the districts of perceived moderate neocons. Rhinos like Adam Kinzinger will simultaneously propping up and literally donating campaign funds to the election efforts of perceived Trump Republicans. You heard that right. I've been following the reporting on this for the last couple of weeks, and it's absolutely fascinating. The DNC is donating to perceived ultra MAGA Republicans so they can craft this image of a radical extreme Republican Party that they can continue to fearmonger about. This will January 6th committee thing in this whole right-wing domestic terrorism nonsense. The narrative that they keep propping up is actually just the beginning of their long-term strategy to cast the Republican Party in a very negative light and benefit them in the long term. And look, this isn't a conspiracy. NPR is reporting on this stuff: why Democrats are paying for ads supporting Republican primary candidates. Democrats are buying ads supporting far-right GOP primary candidates in the hopes of facing them in the general election strategy that former Senator Claire McCaskill of Missouri tried in 2012. They're funneling money into Trump-endorsed candidates thinking that it's going to help them in the short and long term, but I think they're in for a serious wake-up call. But it turns out that possibly, or most likely, probably a lot of the polling data that we currently have access to is wildly underestimating the actual popularity of Republicans in general and Republican candidates. And it leads to a scenario where Ultra MAGA takes over. They are literally helping Donald Trump and Republican voters drain the swamp, and they think it's some genius 5-head 3D chess move or 4D chess move, whatever you want to call it, that's gonna somehow benefit them in the short to long term, and they've gone as far to redraw their districts to enable Trump-endorsed Ultra MAGA candidates and to get rid of people like Adam Kinzinger, who have helped them promote this narrative. This CNN anchor is actually correct when he says that it's cynical and hypocritical. He's right when he says the Democrats are meddling. That's exactly what they're doing. But I think again, he's severely underestimating how badly this could backfire, and the Democrats face just like the whole January 6th sham hearing has in the first place. The whole narrative has basically crumbled because you know what basic voters don't want to hear during an election season. They don't want fear-mongering and doom and gloom and all of this garbage. People want hope. But the Democrats have totally embraced cynicism, a cynical outlook, pessimism that everything's bad and everything's the worst. And our political enemies are literally Satan reincarnated. Donald Trump is literally Hitler, and fascism and insurrection, mud democracy, blah, nothing but fear-mongering cynicism. The end is here, the sky is falling political strategy, and it's going to backfire. People don't want that. And that's why Donald Trump was so successful, because Donald Trump was the first person in a while who wasn't campaigning off America as a deeply flawed, racist, terrible place that must be reformed and recreated. Donald Trump was saying back to our previous glory, back to the glory days, a new age of nationalism and pride and patriotism, and of course, a new age of opportunity and success and prosperity. The Democrats are pushing a narrative of existential threat in the world-ending vote for us, because big government is the only thing that could save you. That's not a winning political strategy. It's going to backfire. And I think it's going to backfire spectacularly into the 2022 midterms. The Democrats are already losing when it comes to redistricting. But now we're learning that they've redrawn districts to benefit America First candidates. They think they're going to get some upset victories, certain matchups are going to flip in their favor, but they don't seem to understand is that the phony push polls, at least in my opinion, are going to be very far off than what we actually see in the midterm elections. A lot of people are saying that Pennsylvania is still leaning Democrat, and John Fetterman is going to carry the state. Now, Dr. Oz or Mehmet Oz is obviously a very weak Republican candidate. But I don't think it's going to be that easy. Especially if you look at voter registration trends in Pennsylvania. Democrats had about 4 million voters, Republicans at around 3.45 million, which means Pennsylvania net differences. The 2022 election shows a GOP plus 146,000 gain in voter registration. That's 66,000 more than Biden's PA 2020 margin of victory. If we go to the suburbs, it continues to look bad for Democrats. Biden's job approval is 37% overall, but with suburban voters, that approval goes down to 33%. Whether we look at Hispanic voters, Black voters, Asian American Pacific Island voters, or Pacific Islander voters, rather voter enthusiasm in people who plan on actually showing up to the polls, who's winning on the issues, the most major issues, whether it's the economy, inflation, immigration, recession, foreign policy, you name it, Democrats are underwater, Republicans are leading on every single issue. Democrats think that they stand a chance. This is their miscalculation. Democrats have fooled themselves into thinking that their fear-mongering and their bogus narratives are sound political strategy that's working, even though it hasn't been working in practice, really, and especially not recently, and they fool themselves into thinking, this is just my opinion. Of course, we don't know what's really going to happen in the next couple of months. But they fooled themselves into thinking that the polling data is accurate. At least the stuff coming out of Politico/Morning Consult's YouGovernor and other outlets. They think the election is closed and that there's a whole lot of toss-ups, but I think they're going to be in for a seriously rude awakening once this red tsunami starts to really materialize and take effect once it gets close to the shore. And they're going to probably have to learn the hard way as this wave engulfs them that they've made a seriously naive political miscalculation and that their fear-mongering garbage-thought-only tactics don't work anymore. You can only cry wolf so many times until people just stop believing you, and worst-case scenario for the Democrats here is their possible political miscalculation backfires. Ultra-MAGA candidates take over everywhere. It leads to an economic resurgence during Donald Trump's second term, hopefully in 2024. And they essentially created the perfect environment for red pills and wake-up calls to be handed out to the masses. Maybe those scary Republican America First candidates weren't the extremists that Democrats kept telling us they were. Maybe good energy policy and economic policy, unless Democrats' socialism is a good thing. We can only hope, we can only dream, but of course we'll follow this and we'll have to see exactly where this political strategy leads for the Democrats. Thank you so much for listening. God bless. I'll be back soon with another report. God speak to each and every one of you. Thank you for all of your support. Thank you for all of your